The government had a rule. Care workers were told that if they had symptoms of the virus, they should stay away from work, stay away from the care home. They did that to protect vulnerable residents. But the government broke its own rule. It sent hundreds of people with the virus into care homes. I know this is difficult, but it does seem to have been one rule for care workers and another rule for this government. And this is not hindsight, because I warned about it at the time. In all of the carefully chosen words today, I still want to hear from the First Minister that the lesson has been learned, the error has been accepted, and the apology has been made for that error. Will the First Minister say those words?
First Minister.
I am sorry for any error that I have made in this. I've said that many times before. I'm not carefully choosing my words. I probably don't have the capacity to do that at the moment. I am trying to be as frank as possible, and we've got things wrong, and we will continue to try to put that right, and we will, have all of the normal processes of accountability. The one thing I will always, not through carefully chosen words, through emotion probably more than anything else, rail against is the idea that we were somehow not caring about what happened in care homes. That does not mean that we didn't get things wrong, but we tried at every point on the basis of the evidence and the advice we had at the time to do the things that we thought were most effective. That, at the earlier stage of the pandemic with care homes, was around infection prevention and control, isolation of residents in their own rooms, the not having communal activity, taking steps around care home workers. At that time, rightly or wrongly, with the benefit of hindsight, that is absolutely legitimate to question this. But at that time, the advice on testing asymptomatic people and the effectiveness of that was different to how it is today. I wish I could turn the clock back in all of this, particularly with care homes, but I can't. What I can do and what I have a responsibility to do is to make sure that we learn these lessons and apply them and get it as right as we possibly can. Will we make more mistakes in this situation? Undoubtedly so, and we will regret them as well. But I promise everybody across the country that every single day I will do my best to get it right, and my government will do our best to get it right, and we will be scrutinised. I will listen to all of the criticisms and scrutiny. It's an important part of this process, and at every step of the way we will do everything we can to keep people as safe as we possibly can. That is true of the population, and it is particularly true of those most vulnerable.
Willie Rennie.
I didn't challenge on the motives. It's the facts and the decisions that we all want to get to, and that's the purpose of this scrutiny. This complicated statistical report is limited. It's limited because of the lack of testing, which means the margins of error are wide. It must not be the end of the investigation of the care home travesty. For the sake of the families, we need to know more. We need to learn as the virus is still with us. After the Nike conference, the government was able to establish whether the strains of the virus had spread around the country. Will that work be done for care homes? And we need to know what is happening now. We need to know that all new residents have had 2 negative tests before they are admitted to care homes. Is that always the case?
President.
That is what we say should happen. I recognise that in a big system, I cannot stand here and say 100% that there is never any circumstance in which a policy is not applied. But that is the policy, and that is what we expect to be applied. The other thing, and this is reflected in the report, there will always be circumstances where a clinician, for good clinical reasons, perhaps a frail elderly patient is at the end of their life, will decide that it is not an appropriate thing to do to conduct an invasive test on that person. And that is something I cannot countermand the decision of a clinician on. But the policy is very, very clear. On my apologies, Willie Rennie's point about genomic sequencing, yes, I would expect genomic sequencing to tell us much more about the spread of the virus across the country, including the situation in care homes. Scotland is probably doing more genomic sequencing than many countries. It did tell us a lot of important things about what happened and actually what didn't happen after the Nike conference. I expect there will be more findings from genomic sequencing over the next period that will look at the situation over the summer and then what happened as we came out of lockdown. So that does have an important part to play, including in care homes. And lastly, on the report, and should I just in response to something, I'm not complaining about scrutiny, not at all. And again, you know, if I ever sound as if I am, that is not my intention. It's an important part of the process we're all going through right now. I have never said this report is the final word. It is obviously limited. It was looking at a particular factor, and there are limitations in what it can say around that factor. I have never tried to say otherwise, but there was a call for us to commission a report into this particular factor, and that's what we did. There are other factors we have to understand more, and then in the fullness of time, through a full public inquiry, we have to look at the situation in totality. And I am absolutely clear in my mind that that has to happen. It has to happen for the country overall. It has to happen for everybody, not just families of residents in care homes, but particularly them. It has to happen for their sake, for the families of those who died. And it has to happen so that we learn lessons now that can be applied if the world, hopefully not in our lifetimes, is ever going through a situation like this again. And I am 100% committed to that process. But right now, my main duty as First Minister is to continue to lead the country in a very focused way through the second wave that still lies ahead of us.